good news and bad news for Arlecchino wanters. The good news is that it's about time we got our second playable Fatui Harbinger. The bad news is that holy Hoyoverse, can you stop writing your ability descriptions in Japanese, because what the heck is this? I know for sure there's going to be that one commenter down below saying Razor language please, so yeah, let's go ahead and make this as simple as possible. Your baseline how to play Arlecchino looks something like opening up the fight with her skill first, switching to your supports to set up off-field damage, and then switching back onto the field to charge attack once. After that, you can spam her pyro-infused normal attacks until you feel the need to end her field time by finishing things off with her elemental burst. Using her burst will reset her skill's cooldown, but by the end of Arlecchino's field time, it should be back up since her normal attacks also slowly reduce the cooldown of her skill as well. Regardless, feel free to use your skill right after you use your burst and then repeat the process again by setting up buffs and off-field damage. That's the TLDR version of how to play Arlecchino, but of course, as a guide maker, my duty is to explain the reasoning behind why this is how you should play Arlecchino. So basically, Arlecchino wants to start off every fight using her skill to tag enemies with a status called Blood Debt. Once you charge attack, you'll absorb the Blood Debt off of nearby enemies to gain Pyro Infusion on her normal attacks and gain a Bond of Life worth 65% of her max health. However, you don't want to use your skill immediately into a charge attack. Instead, after using her skill to start the battle, we switch directly into our supports to set up buffs and off-field damage due to the effects of her first Ascension talent. With this talent, if the Blood Debt mark sits on enemies for at least 5 seconds, when you swap back in and use your charge attack to absorb the Blood Debt, you'll gain double the Bond of Life at 130%. Also, if you defeat an enemy before you can swap back into Arlecchino to absorb that Blood Debt with the charge attack, don't worry, this talent also ensures that Arlecchino is guaranteed to get the doubled 130% Bond of Life when your party defeats an enemy with the Blood Debt on them. Gaining double the Bond of Life value is so important because the more Bond of Life Arlecchino currently has, the higher her normal attack multipliers are. Each pyro-infused normal attack will consume 7.5% of her Bond of Life, meaning the more cycles of normal attacks that you go through, the weaker they become because you'll slowly have less Bond of Life to consume. So once you decide to switch out of Arlecchino, you'll want to use her burst to reset the cooldown of her skill if it's not off cooldown yet, and then also heal her. It is important to note that in practice, Arlecchino's burst will always serve as the end of her rotation, as you cannot use it in the middle of her field time because it clears all of her Bond of Life, which completely takes away her Pyro Infusion. Additionally, her burst is the only way to heal herself thanks to her first Ascension talent, which grants her 40% pyro damage bonus in return for the inability to be healed by other characters. As you'll see in the team building section, because she cannot be healed, shields, damage reduction, and resistance to interruption sources from your supports are extremely valuable to Arlecchino. And speaking of resistance to interruption, her C1 provides exactly that, plus normal attack damage through an increase in the conversion between Bond of Life and a normal attack multiplier. Note that this does not increase the 7.5% Bond of Life that you consume per normal attack, but rather just increases the number that her current Bond of Life is being multiplied by, so there's no worry about this constellation shortening her damage window. This is probably one of the stronger C1s in the game since most of Arlecchino's damage does come from her normal attacks, and in some cases I'd even recommend her C1 over her weapon if you're stuck between which to get, but that ultimately depends on whether or not you have good substitute polearms. More on what her substitute polearms are in the weapon section, but for now let's quickly wrap up the Constellation overview. Her C2 lets her gain the doubled Bond of Life value without having to wait 5 seconds after using her skill, and also unleashes a large pyro hit when she does absorb her skill's mark off of enemies. This is a very nice quality of life and also flashy constellation that allows you to set up all your buffs beforehand and get huge damage at the start of your rotation. But overall, this constellation is not needed since Arlecchino is already a great character at C0. Her C3 is one of the rare cases that increases normal attack talent level by 3 rather than her skill or her burst, which is always a nice bonus in the case of Arlecchino's damage. After that, C4 is a pretty useless energy and 2-second burst cooldown decrease, and C6 is just whale territory for giant numbers on her burst and normal attacks via extra crit value. As promised, here's the weapon section where your biggest decision when it comes to C1 versus signature on Arlecchino relies on whether or not you have some of her best polearm substitutes. Now, the reason why we're even having this conversation is because her signature Crimson Moons Semblance is good, but not crazy levels of overpowered. Although the passive does give her an extra 25% Bond of Life, her consumption of Bond of Life is pretty fast when she's at 155% Bond of Life, which is 130% from her skill and 25% from this weapon's passive. That means you're not actually getting much bonus normal attack multiplier since you're consuming that extra Bond of Life extremely fast, and basically the biggest benefit of this weapon is actually the crit rate stat and the 36% damage bonus when you are under the effects of Bond of Life. Two other 5-star polearms can be within 10 to 15% of her signature weapon in terms of DPS levels, namely Primordial Jade-Winged Spear and Staff of Homa. Like Arlecchino's signature, these two polearms are also crit stat sticks with a ton of stat value on their passives through attack buffs. Staff of Scarlet Sands and Vortex Vanquisher are also great options that can be around the same distance away from her signature, but only in specific scenarios. For Staff of Scarlet Sands, you need to be running Arlecchino with a decent amount of EM in a Vaporize team, and for Vortex Vanquisher, you need to run Arlecchino with a Shielder. And for some reason, if you have Calamity Queller without Shen-He, then that too becomes a viable option, but noticeably worse than all of the previous 5-star options mentioned. However, most people don't have these niche 5-star weapons and instead will opt to run Deathmatch if you're someone that buys the Battle Pass or either the 5-star Scoured Spine or the 3-star White Tassel. An R5 Deathmatch is Arlecchino's best 4-star weapon and can beat out any other weapon aside from her signature, Primordial Jade Spear, and Staff of Homa. While the other BP polearm, Ballad of the Fjord, is also very good in Vaporize teams specifically, unless you're spending on every Battle Pass, Deathmatch is usually just the more recommended option for its flexibility on not just Arlecchino, but also on other characters as well. As for Scoured Spine, it's about the same level as Calamity Queller in terms of damage and only about 5% better than White Tassel, which is quite the testament to how good the normal attack damage and crit rate on White Tassel is. Of course, the downside of using White Tassel is its low base attack as a 3-star polearm, but that's something that you can easily cover up with flat attack buffs from characters like Bennett. Other free-to-play friendly 4-star weapons to consider on Arlecchino include Blackcliff Pull, Missive Wind Spear, and Dragon's Bane, but these can give very mixed results and can even end up worse than White Tassel. For Blackcliff, this weapon does have a ton of drip for Arlecchino, but without being able to activate the passive in single target boss fights, this whole weapon line is extremely mid. Meanwhile, Dragon's Bane and Missive Wind Spear are reliant on Vaporize due to their emphasis on elemental mastery. Overall, the biggest takeaways that you should have from this weapon section is that if you have enough primos and want to choose between either C1 or her signature weapon, getting her signature over C1 is great if you don't have good generalist polearms like Jade Spear, Homa, or Deathmatch. Other 5-star polearms are situationally good, and White Tassel is your best bet as a budget/beginner option, beating out a lot of the other 4-star polearms not named Deathmatch. Moving on to artifacts, you can take a breather because Arlecchino's artifact options are much simpler compared to her weapons. As you would expect, one of the new artifact sets introduced in patch 4.6, Fragment of Harmonic Whimsy, is Arlecchino's best in slot by a good margin thanks to its niche Bond of Life-centered 4-set effect. Now, of course, none of you guys have this set farmed up at the time of releasing this video, so what are the other options that you can use in the meantime? Well, the best option you can choose is the 4-set Gladiator, and this set also doubles as the set that you're most likely to have spare pieces of since you passively get Gladiator pieces while doing world bosses or weekly bosses. Other temporary 4-set combinations that you can use include the 4-set Gilded Dreams specifically for Vaporize teams, or the 4-set Echoes of an Offering for my gamers with low ping. If you don't have any of these 4 sets to complete, then by all means feel free to run a 2-set combination, using any combination between the 2-set Crimson Witch of Flames, 2-set Marujuse Hunter, and any 2-set that offers attack percent as a set bonus. For artifact stats, Arlecchino uses the standard attack percent in the Sands, pyro damage in the Goblet, and crit in the Circlet. EM is a viable substitute in the Sands, assuming you're running Arlecchino in Vaporize teams, but that's only the case if you have a ton of attack buffs through supports and weapon passives, because Arlecchino isn't able to trigger Vaporize on every single hit of pyro damage that she deals. For artifact substats, take crit stats over everything else and then balance out your attack percent, EM, and energy recharge. Because Arlecchino's skill generates a lot of energy and she technically doesn't even need to burst every rotation, her energy requirements are extremely low. If you want the safety net of being able to burst at the end of every rotation to get the burst healing, then 120 to 130 total energy recharge is a good benchmark and is very achievable through just artifact substats. Arlecchino has 2 staple team archetypes, and the more recent and exciting one involves our newest pyro support, Chevreuse. This junk food loving chick completely revived the usage of pyro characters outside of Vaporize and Virgin, and Arlecchino adds another main DPS option for her to support. Generally, these two will either be paired with double electro characters or a third pyro character with just one electro character in the party. If you opt for 2 electro characters, there's no doubt that Beto is almost a must-have with Arlecchino. Not only does she provide a ton of AoE damage via her burst, but an underrated part of her burst includes resistance to interruption and damage reduction as well. The second character is usually there to provide the electro resonance and electro energy particles to alleviate Beto's energy problem, and a plus is that they deal a lot of extra off-field damage. As such, your options in the final slot are Fischl, Yaimiko, Raiden Shogun, Lisa, or Electro MC. For those opting to run triple pyro characters, the Beto replacement in the third slot is usually Bennett for how much of a damage increase he's able to give Arlecchino, but some players may look to opt for defense instead. Common defensive options include C4 Yanfei or Homa for shielding, which is the best form of defense for Arlecchino. But Deha can also provide resistance to interruption and damage redirection away from Arlecchino onto Deha herself. The final slot electro characters remain the same as previously, and if you do want to use Beto as a solo electro due to her and Arlecchino synergy, you can, but just make sure you have enough energy sources to sustain her burst. The other main archetype for Arlecchino teams is the one that I've been yapping about for this entire video. The tried and true Vaporize teams for Arlecchino are about as cookie cutter as they can get, with Arlecchino, your Hydro Applicator, which is either Xingqiu or Yelan, and then 2 flex slots. For the first flex slot, I like to think of it as choosing a buffer either between Bennett, Yunjin, or a second Hydro character. Bennett, of course, grants Arlecchino some of the biggest buffs in the game, but I know a lot of people hate his circle and would rather play more freely. If that's the case, you can pair Xingqiu and Yelan together for massive off-field damage from that pair, or you can choose to use Candace. Candace does not provide reliable off-field Hydro application, but since we are strictly running her in double Hydro, she doesn't need to perform that job. Instead, her burst allows her to buff any elemental damage dealt by your party's normal attacks, which of course includes Arlecchino's Pyro Infusion that cannot be overridden by Candace's Hydro Infusion. Like Candace, Yunjin is another normal attack buffer that can provide decent boosts to Arlecchino's damage along with the freedom of not being tied to a field for buffs. These two may not provide as large of a buff that Bennett can to Arlecchino, but not having to play Circle Impact is also a big positive that many would like to consider. For the final slot, your best option is Zhongli as the defensive backbone for the team. Substitutes for Zhongli's shield include Layla, Diona, Toma, or C4 Yanfei. If you're really confident in your dodging skills, you can also forego these shielders in favor for either Kazuha or Sucrose with the Force-set Viridescent Veneerer, but this decision is completely up to you as the player. With that, hopefully you guys enjoyed this Arlecchino guide, and most importantly, I hope this guide was helpful for building the perfect Arlecchino for your account. Other than that, it's the same as always. I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.